So people are like wondering what's the blog post. It's as people know, I write a bit. This post was a long time coming, a very long time coming. So I'm just gonna read it to you guys. I'm gonna kind of explain it, and I gotta draw a little bit because it gets a little like just everyone has a different way of seeing things visually. So I just kind of go into a little visual thing. It's not like exactly how I do things, but it's just a helper I have. So this is the latest blog. You can do Bang blog to get my blog. And since I'll put this to YouTube, I'll link that in YouTube as well. So it's story time with Mr. Chro. So I'm like, alright, this one has been a long time coming. For decades before Overwatch, I've always half-joked about skill, noobs, pros, and generally have held a bit of an elitist view on video games. Anyone that knows me, yes, they'll pretty much agree to this. You know, I'll call people plebs. When they suck at the game, and a lot of the times when someone's like, they're like, oh, I think the game should be this way, and I'll be like, well, that's just you suck, and actually, you know, it should be different. But as I've gotten older, the study of game design, I've refined it into more of an understanding of skill, when something requires too much and when something requires too little. Please stick around because this is going to be a longer post that covers some random parts of the game design and balance. I promise it all comes together eventually. I do put out a comment, and if anyone wants to know game design, you should look up Jeff Alex's discussion, Cursed Problems. He goes over a lot of good stuff, but he did some basically statistics analysis and whatnot, and he found out that players are said to believe a game is fair when they win 70% of the time. So whenever we talk about balance, you kind of have to understand that people are going to talk about balance. At least most people. Let me get closer to my mic. Sometimes it's sketchy. Most people will talk about balance from their point of view, and they'll be like, I should be winning a little more. Or, you know, I want it to be 50%, but truly what they want is at 70%. So keep this in mind when we talk about balance and how the community perceives it. When someone talks about balance, 70% win rate is what they're probably wanting. Right now, a big complaint in Overwatch is Genji, which is seen as high skill, often will lose to a Moira, which is seen as low skill. Now, I'll address this issue directly, but understand the overall goal of this example is to better understand risk-reward and what role skill has in the entire exchange. My goal of this post is to make everyone believe that players are not upset at Moira, but the concept of Moira, which means that unless something drastically happens to her, Genji players will always be upset. And if you know what happened recently with the Genji patch, which could go live tomorrow, we'll basically, nothing in that really helps out Moira. I'd go in that later. The first step to this is understanding how Overwatch was designed. First step to this is understanding how Overwatch was designed is to look at its primary reason for being created. I gotta rewrite that. To create an easy, accessible game. So by and far, when people are talking about Overwatch and what is it supposed to do, and they're like, oh, it's balance, oh, it's supposed to be this, it's supposed to be that. No. The Overwatch is about making money, but it's about getting players into the first-person shooter genre, and getting them from like the MOBA or maybe the RTS or maybe these other fields, and just trying to bring them into the FPS because the FPS world is a little bit cutthroat, especially if you just look at the old school shooters, and it's just very skill-based, and it pushes off a lot of people. And Overwatch came in and says all these people that usually hate them, they'll come to us because we're Blizzard and we'll make a game that everyone can play. I go into great deal into this on my first post back in 2017. I kind of call it out then. It is a much longer explanation than what I just
My
put out.
genius is finally recognized.
The main idea is to promote a flat design so that anyone can pick up the game, or a simple, but I like the term flat. So when I say flat design, what I mean is that there are very few moving parts and variables in Overwatch. If you're looking for an answer to a problem, you simply pick the hero that solves your issue. Most players would just suggest that this is how most games work. But let me clarify by showing you what isn't a flat design. MOBAs. And MOBA is the antithesis of flat design. It is bulky, it is cumbersome, and it's complicated. And this is where I'm going to a little bit of get out there. I apologize for any confusion, but I think this... But I'm thinking of creating a video for this one. Yeah, here we are. Look at that. So follow me with this one, and I apologize a bit because it does get a little wacky. And I'll just use this part of the paint program. In fact, let's make sure all the words are visible. So basically it comes down to this. In my head, how I see a game like Dota or League design is that players have a specific goal or win condition in mind. So if you want to think like a win condition is something tangible. So if we have like a base game, and let's say one team's win condition is here, and another team's win condition is, let's say, over here. Now picture that goal in space, make it a ball for simplicity. That's the example we have here. Now picture a tree attempting to grow towards this goal. The largest trunk of that tree, the trunk of that tree is the largest and most stable growth towards your goal, but cannot be changed once started. This is how you, this is you picking your hero. So how we see it here is that if you had to get to this from the base game to the goal, as soon as you pick your heroes, all of a sudden this is like how your tree is growing. And maybe their tree is like this. Right, and they're trying to get to their goals, but this is how they're starting. Now, they can't change once it's started. They set the stage for the early game and how you're looking to achieve your goal. Remember that the enemy team is doing the same. They have a tree as well, and they're reaching towards their own goal. These goals often conflict, and the enemy team is doing the same. These goals often conflict, and that's where we have tactics and strategy clashing together. So basically, if somehow these two strategies are going up against each other, and they'll essentially create branches, and they'll have conflicts, right? And as these conflicts happen, then the goal is no longer right here. The goal got pushed back, right? And in this specific example, let's say like this team was going for an early game build. They conflicted. They're going for like, I guess an earlier game build in this one, but it's more figurative. And so it changed. Now, here's the thing. The game changes based on what happens in the game in MOBAs. But if you have pieces that you cannot change, like your hero picks, then how the fuck are you supposed to recover from that? Some people say you don't. That doesn't make for a fun game. And I'll just read this just to kind of go over it. Example of clashing is one team losing a couple heroes early on. After the clash, it's often that the team's goals will be affected. In such a case as taking an early loss, let's say your goal is now farther away. Alright, but you already had a plan. So let's get back up here. But you already had a plan, and the majority of the plan was set in stone with your hero picks. How can you deal with all these variables that can happen differently every game? You need a mechanic that allows customization. In my tree example, these are the branches. The branches represent items and talents. That's kind of how Dota works. Items and talents allow you to specifically customize how your hero operates based on the situation. While they don't have as large an impact as hero picks, they do provide a flexible way to play the game so players can adapt on a per-game basis. Right, you can run the same composition in Dota for, multiple ways, and based on your item loadout and what you're up against, you can completely change how the game is played. And you're thinking, but wait, you picked a hero, you're stuck in a specific strategy. And it's like, no. Items allow that much customization, and talents allow that much customization that you can change greatly how a team originally plays out. While they don't have as large an impact as heroes, they do provide a flexible way to play the game so players can adapt on a per-game basis. Items are designed to fill a specific role in the game, meaning there are items for pure damage, some are for damage and health, some are for movement speed or magical damage or utility. So this is where we start seeing parallels with Overwatch, and why I always say, no, you don't want hero bans in Overwatch, or at least how like a pick ban pool. Because bans in Overwatch don't ban heroes like in a MOBA. What they do is they ban items. Because items are what really provide the customization and the flow and a really great effect on the game. If we're talking Dota, Black King Bar gives you magic immunity. It's one of the paramount items in the game. It's just something that happens every single game. It's like taking that out of the game. It changes it completely. Items have sometimes a bigger effect on the game than certain heroes. Especially if you're going for a specific strategy, items play a gigantic part. Let's also note, items do not overlap with each other according to... an item's role doesn't overlap, I should say. Much like a hero's roles in Overwatch try not to overlap, so too do items. Like, you don't have an early strength, like 5... You don't have 5 items in Dota that give you strength and dex early game, right? You have 1, maybe 2, and then those lead to different branches later game. That kind of set the builds. Yep. MOBAs have to provide this ability to customize heroes because once you pick a hero, that's it, you're stuck with it. If a hero cannot deal with a specific situation, then the opposing team has an easy way to win, which makes for a poor game on both sides. Truly, when we talk about game design, we want the game to feel as fair as possible in most situations, most of the time. Of course, there are times when in Dota you get outpicked, but you can try to salvage that at a lower rank. Of course, at the higher ranks, any advantage is magnified, and of course they take advantage of that. But at the lower ranks, and as far as the majority of players, these small advantages that pros really abuse, back, at the lower SRs, they really can't take advantage of it. If a hero cannot deal with a specific situation, the person has easy way to win a poor game on both sides. A game that's too easily won feels like rock, paper, scissors, and since these games take time, the players feel helpless the entire time they're losing. Basically, if we start a 40-minute game and you picked rock and I picked paper, you feel like shit the entire time. So you try to avoid that as much as possible, according, in design. It's going to happen every now and then. I'm not saying 100% avoid it, but it shouldn't be a common theme to the game. Because it just sucks. It really does. It sucks. And it's like, they didn't really do anything. They just picked something different. And, fuck. They didn't execute on it. So we have, eventually teams will have many branches to reach their goal, right? So in this example, like maybe they got branches here, they got branches here, the branches go like this. And these are all the items in Hero and all those combinations. This didn't go here. Now this is over here. And they got to completely change the strategy. And this basically all changes based on the game mechanics. Each of these branches that allow to get a specific goal are use of mechanics. And this is really important. So one, like, this is a mechanic in the game, this big trunk. And then each of these branches is, they can be the same mechanic, but it's another understanding of the mechanic, right? So a mechanic is like items, or how an item works. Understand that items work differently at the middle part of the game, the beginning part of the game, and the late part of the game. So they're very complex. And I go on to say mechanics that players have to learn, mechanics that the developer has to balance. Not only do these mechanics have to interact with each other normally, but they have to interact with everything based on different times of the game. And that's the biggest part in balance with MOBAs, is that you have early, mid, and late game. And the talent features in Dota are specifically there to address heroes that were good early game, but they sucked late game. And the game just sucked when people's strategy didn't work early on, because you just stalled the game out, and late game, their heroes had no options. They had little functionality, so they lost, which sucked. You don't want to lose like on a waiting game. You want everyone to be able to participate throughout the entire part of the game. And while they will participate to a greater or lesser effect, they still need to participate. They shouldn't be like just in the corner and they're stuck just buying sentries or wards or whatever, like in Dota's case. So all these mechanics and how they interact with everything is immensely complex and has a serious learning curve. This is exactly what Blizzard wanted to avoid. Like I said, Blizzard MOBAs, cumbersome, Overwatch, flat, sleek, slender, if you will. So how did Blizzard take Overwatch in the opposite direction of a MOBA? So one, they removed all the complex mechanics by simply allowing players to change their hero or their trunk. Right, here we have this. Right? But the way in Overwatch is, if this is the game and you have a goal, you fucking get the goal. Hold on, let me draw a straight line to better represent this. You just get it. You just reach out and you get it. There's no time, there's no complex mechanics. You go, I need a long range option. Bam, got it. Oh, now I need a short range option. Bam, got it. I need another shield. Bam. You just switch heroes. That's it. There's nothing that changes based on time of the game. There's like Winston fundamentally works at 1 second of the game as he does 10 minutes of the game. He is the same hero at all times. So they remove all the player with the hero in the trunk. Why worry about your items or how it interacts with each hero? Even before that, you have to build an entire system to get and spend gold to get these items. So that's just complexity, right? If you have a game with items, you actually do have to create a system for people to get gold. And then you have to balance that, and you have to have an economy, and you have to have all this other stuff. The talents have to be balanced to allow heroes to be relevant during different parts of a 30-minute game. Fuck all that noise. Just make a simple game. Let's remove all of these and make it simple. If you want an answer, simply reach out and grab it. If you need a long-range object, pick it. If you need a close-range solution, then go to spawn and get what you need immediately. This is what I mean by a flat design. Blizzard saw all these complex mechanics over here, and they said, why create all this shit? Let's just do a MOBA, but you swap your hero to do what you want. And this is why everyone, well, at least the developers understood. I don't want to say the population of the community understood this. They're like, swap, please swap. Bastion seems overpowered. Have you tried Hanzo to fight him? Because if you just try Hanzo, you'll win. And they just had this more or less rock, paper, scissors type analogy where they're like, oh, that doesn't work? We'll do that. Right? If you ever complained about how powerful Tracer is on the forums, they go McCree, you win. No one talks about execution. No one talks about that. They just say, you win based on your pick. Yeah, and that's why it's so important you swap in Overwatch, because originally the heroes weren't meant to deal with every situation. This is also why I don't like about hero bans, as we discussed. The heroes are items, they are talents, perks, passives, all in one. With a flat design, you only need to design a hero to fill a role. This has its own set of problems, but solves the immense issue of getting players into the FPS genre, which is Overwatch's primary goal. End of sentence. There are problems with ability-based shooters, sure. But you have to understand the problem that Overwatch was looking to solve was complexity, which they did. This creates other issues, but that's what we're working through. Another part of Overwatch's flat design is that heroes don't have complicated classes or natural bonuses or weaknesses. The role they seek to fill, they do so naturally through obvious and often visual indicators, as you know with visual clutter that's been happening in the game more and more. By this I mean Tracer is given a flanker title, and flankers do plus 50% damage to supports, but take 50% more damage from explosives, as such an RTS game. So if you ever played StarCraft, Warcraft, Red Alert, most RTS games, there'll be like a damage type, like to light. Let's say the Vulture does extra damage against light. Workers are light armored, so they do extra damage against workers, right? They have this balanced mechanic where they're just like, it's kind of very specific, and you have to learn these extra things. They're just like, that does more damage against that because I said so. They didn't do that, right? All heroes are balanced for a role, and their abilities and weapons support that. As an example, let's say Blizzard wanted to create a flanker. A long-range flanker doesn't feel balanced, as a long-range flanker would just kill you from the front with their range, right? You can't say Widow's a flanker when she just sit so far away and shoot you in the face. So, inherently, flankers are mid- or close-ranged heroes. So to support the hero being close range, they could give him a gun with heavy fall-off and a wide spread, right? We see that with shotguns. We see that with Tracer's ability. We see that with Genji's attacks as well, right? His right-click, less damage far away, more damage close up. We also see this with Doomfist. Shotgun, abilities that are close range, but mainly, shotgun with spread. Now this leaves them vulnerable because close-range targets are more easily hit. So how do you address this? Give them an ability to get in and out of close range. As an example, blink or dash, right? We'll talk about flankers more on. Let me just get through this. I'm sure after a few playtests, they learned that too many blinks or dashes felt unfair to the defender. So how about we give this hero an ability to take risks but not feel heavily punished? Right? If we gave Tracer 20 blinks or like 5 blinks, all of a sudden she just feels overwhelming. Same thing with Genji. If Genji had 2 dashes, he would be a completely different hero. So essentially, they're like, all right, let's limit their mobility. Let's limit the amount of stuff they can do. But let's give them something to mitigate risk in a situation. So Tracer has recall, Genji has deflect. They worked in different ways. You have abilities to mitigate risk, such as recall or deflect. Designing these heroes require no special mechanic to be a flanker. They use simple concepts such as fall-off, weapon spread, HP, and model size to naturally make them a flanker. Realistically, design could have started from any one of these ideas to get to the final idea of Tracer or Genji. So what I'm saying is, they're not like, I need to make a flanker. Alright, they need to do this. Usually what a game design does is they're like, man, wouldn't it be fun to have a hero that blinks? Yeah. Support? No, that feels really shitty. You want a hero that can blink, that can heal people and blink 3 times. Like, doesn't feel right. How about a tank? No, fuck no. That's terrifying. Reinhardt with dash? Yeah, no thank you. And then they're like, all right, it has to be a DPS hero. It has to be close range. It has to be X, Y, and Z. Not saying, like, do this in order. I'm just saying understand that the abilities support each other, including their weapons. So this is now how we have themes with specific items or specific types of heroes. We're talking about flankers, right? Flankers, we have Doom, Genji, Echo, Tracer. Notice how all these heroes have rubber mechanics that force them into mid-close range, right? Echo can do long range, but not very consistent, right? It's a projectile that gets farther away as it gets, or gets spread out as it goes farther.
My genius
in the game.
is finally recognized.
Doomfist, obviously, shotgun, not good far, good close. Genji, again, he's a little bit different. He essentially has poke to set up his own engagements and create opportunities, but for the most part, slower projectile, harder to hit long range. They'll have abilities to get them into the fight, to take a risk, and then abilities to get them out of the fight. This is where pretty much Doomfist, Echo, Tracer, and Genji all, again, have these things. They have something to get them into the fight. Now, Genji needs to get a kill to get out, but that's fine. That's just a different type of hero. But they're all burst damage, and they all have something to close the distance, to use their burst damage and their close range ability, and if it works, they can get out. Doomfist has the same thing. Echo pretty much has the same deal as well. Of course, there's different variations to them, but that gives us a nice diversity. It's why in most cases, when someone doesn't like a hero, it's not specifically about the hero, it's about the role that the hero fills. Doomfist is a highly controversial hero, and rightfully so. Does there need to be a flanker with an option to flank head-on? If we look at all the flankers, and the way I see flankers, of course I'll relate it to martial arts, but it's a thing called the Fighter's Cross, and it's just the asterisks. And basically, these are like the 8 ways that, hit with something. If you have a sword, it's the 8 ways to swing a sword. Any type of stick weapon, hammers, not hammer like as a weapon, like a hammer fist. Everything kind of falls on the Fighter's Cross. I see like this is Genji that comes in from the side of the flank. Tracer's here. Sombra could be finished there. But Doomfist is more like the front, and like if there's an X-axis or a Y-axis, then that would be Echo. Doomfist is a weird flanker because he can kind of come from the front and just get through shields and fuck you up and then get out. And so instead of saying Doom is overpowered, Doom this, Doom that, just be like, you have to sit back and go, should a flanker fill the role of kind of a head-on flank? Because if you see him coming and you have stuns or control, all of a sudden it doesn't really work too well. That's exactly how Doomfist works. So the question is, do you believe that role should exist or not? Also, does there need to be a flanker with options to flank head-on? Notice how I didn't mention he has burst damage. It's because it's inherent with being a flanker. A flanker that doesn't have burst damage is fucking useless. You run up to someone, you flank them, and then you're like, I'm bugging you. And they're just like, well, whatever, I'm going to kill your team, or I'm going to kill you and then kill your team. Flankers must have burst damage. So you can't really do that. So if you're upset about Doomfist doing burst damage, you're upset about him being a flanker. And then you can't nerf him. You can't nerf him to not do any burst damage because he stops being a flanker at that point, and his entire skill set needs to be redone. This is what we call a rework. This is when a hero is removed from the role and is put into a slightly new one. Another good example of this, 200 HP heroes are designed, at least for themes. I go over in this post, not this one, but this post, and I go like, this is how 250 HP heroes are designed. This is why people don't like them, but this is why they're designed that way. They all fill a certain role and they do a certain thing. That's it. But yeah, a rework is essentially when you pivot. You're like, all right, Doomfist doesn't need to be needs to be a flanker. Maybe Doomfist needs to fill a different role, and how can we pivot his abilities to do that instead of being a flanker? That's the type of rework, and just the type of thought you have to do with that. This is a big point, that's why it's bolded. As MOBAs create items and perks to deal with different situations, so too must Blizzard create different heroes to fill these specific issues that you face in Overwatch. Essentially, as new situations arise in Overwatch, Blizzard has to give us the tool because of this design, right? If we do not have a tool to fill a situation, we can't do anything about it, right? Overwatch is about having a simple answer. If that answer doesn't exist, we have to kind of fudge something together, but nothing truly answers that. Rightfully so. To avoid role overlap, So to avoid overlap then, new solutions need to be created for old problems. We've seen Blizzard attempt to solve problems by introducing new heroes multiple times. This isn't a bad approach at first, but if you create a single hero to deal with a problem, then one hero will be strong enough to deal with the combined 6 heroes. Every time Jeff says a hero is meta-changing, I get worried because I know an overpowered hero will be released. In bold, a single hero can't nullify an entire team and still be balanced. I believe this was noticed during the time period of Doomfist, Moira, and Brigitte. Ever since then, the direction has been more generalist than specialist. If you look at the hero releases, you will see the 3 most controversial heroes in Overwatch were released one after another. It was Doomfist, it was Moira, and then Brigitte. What were they there for? People were sick of tanks, so Doomfist. They were sick of shields and tanks and D.Va and all that stuff. Doomfist was like, this is the hero that Jeff goes, this hero is meta-changing. And you're like, wait, to change the meta, one hero has to deal with the entire strategy. So this hero is going to be broken as fuck. Which he was. He was pretty crazy at first. After that, and people, Blizzard probably stepped back. They're like, alright, we kind of got Doomfist figured out, but we need something to deal with. Flankers. There is no support that deals with a flanker at this point in time. What happened? They created Moira, and then they created Brigitte. I think it's no coincidence that these 3 problematic heroes were created, and then after that, bam, generalists. Everything stopped being a specialist. And if you've read my post before, you'll understand why, which we'll go into a little bit later. Now that I briefly talked about Overwatch's flat design, what does it have to do about Genji vs. Moira, alright? Chro, you're talking for like fucking half hour. Shut the fuck up. Tell me what's wrong. Well, I'll tell you what's wrong. Flankers were an issue at the start of Overwatch, specifically for supports. Supports could sometimes handle them, but it wasn't consistent enough. Blizzard needed to introduce a new hero to solve that old problem. It's tricky. I got a typo here. It's tricky, but it needed to be a healer that could deal with flankers, but isn't strong enough to deal with tanks or other DPS. Because if you have a support that can deal with DPS heroes, just overall, hero's way too strong, right? This is the basis of Moira. Her primary attack gives that need for consistent damage on an evasive flank, while still giving them time, 3 to 4 seconds, before killing them. This is pretty fair if you consider Overwatch's low time to kill. Every flanker can kill you in less than a second, if conditions are right. It just depends on how often that condition is right. If you decrease her consistency, then your evasive flankers will end up dodging the damage, and it becomes just like the current supports, with the issue not solved. Right? Moira is there to solve an issue. You can't be like, don't solve that issue. No. That's for fucking point, guys. For higher consistency weapon, you need lower damage to make it feel fair to both parties. If the damage was higher and the consistency was lower, which is what people have been talking about right now, you'd have higher SR players crush flankers and lower SR players lose to flankers. Essentially, the hero would lose her identity based on the skill of the player, which you don't want to do. The hero should have an identity and stick to that identity. That's what's important in Overwatch. That's how we don't have massive role overlap or anything like that. You're now starting to see the issue with any type of minor change to Moira. Either you lower her damage to a point that flankers always win, or you make her less consistent but stronger, where flankers have even less chance to win at higher ranks. In either case, you make the hero feel less fair. While players get upset about specific abilities, what they're upset about isn't that Moira is strong, it's that a consistent anti-flank hero support exists. They can't complain about it like that, because if they did, it'd be pretty obvious that they're upset that there's a support they don't have an advantage over. I cannot press this point hard enough. This is like me playing Junkrat and jumping into a Pharah and being like, I can't kill her head on. The hero's broken. Why is it that these flankers attack an anti-flanker head on and then complain about getting beat? Very strange. Moira in any form, as long as she keeps her role, will be a thorn in a flanker's side because she's designed to be. The real answer to the issue is because of the flat design choice, you need to either change the tool you're using or greatly change the method that you're using it with. Blizzard's kind of going for the second. So where does that leave us? Both sides of the Genji Moira arguments can be read, can read this and still not feel any better. Why? Well, skill, or at least the perception of it. Now, let me finally define skill. To me, skill is consistency. Something that is more consistent is easier than something that is less consistent. In the same manner, someone who is more consistent is better than someone who isn't. This is why I prefer best of 5 or 7 matches or games with a longer time to kill. Over time, the better player should always win. If we have best of 1s and very low time to kills, the best player will not always win, which some games go for, but if it's a skill-based game, FPSs are about skill, we should probably adhere to that a little bit. The better player should win in a longer scenario. While abilities may be balanced, so you get less value from something that's more consistent, and more value from something that's less consistent that has nothing to do with skill itself. So this is basically Junkrat Mines compared to hit scans, or Junkrat Concussive, or Primary as compared to hit scan. If Junkrat hits all his shots, he provides immense value, but is at a lower consistency, so he doesn't provide immense value. While hit scans will do a little bit less damage than that, but they're more consistent and provide greater value. If you were to play Widow, what makes a headshot harder than a body shot? Consistency. Headshots happen less often and are therefore harder. Of course, there's more hitbox available for non-critical shots, but that's the mechanic that leads to it being less consistent. The fundamental idea is to introduce mechanics that make players less consistent to make an ability harder. The problem now becomes that skill is subjective, which it truly is. It really is. Junkrat, to me, is fairly easy. But some other players, it's incredibly difficult. You know, maybe some even pro players couldn't make Junkrat work where I make it work. But that's the problem with skill being subjective. If everyone in the world could get a 50% headshot rate with Widow, you'd have to change her because it's too easy. Right? I understand that Widow headshots are difficult, but if everyone can do it, then it doesn't matter if it takes skill or not in your, ideology. The fact is, it's consistent now. We have to change it. Which brings in a whole topic. I don't cover it here. But this is why a game has to be balanced throughout time. Is because players get better and things become... they fall outside the scope that they were originally designed for. Yeah. In our Genji Moira example, it's because Moira is meant to be an anti-flanker that she needs a large leeway on her attack. This makes her more consistent. To do otherwise removes her from an anti-flanker role. This is why you don't want to reduce her hitbox on her attack or anything like that, because then she doesn't fill the role she's supposed to fill. Players believe that when they do something that is difficult, that they should be rewarded for it. Specifically when against something that's not skillful. At the surface level, it makes sense, but completely clashes with the idea that different heroes are there to respond to different situations. Remember how heroes are designed with inherent abilities to fill their role. By definition, inherent means you did nothing to earn it, which is a contradictory of skill. Second point, I can't press hard enough. If you said, oh, I'm better than you, and you picked McCree, and you were against a Pharah, no. You didn't do anything to work for to beat that Pharah. You had an advantage inherently, and that's it. Yes, you made the right choice, but to say you're more skillful than her, not the case. This is such a predominant theme in Overwatch that any hero that has an advantage over another means that the stronger hero takes less skill to deal with the weaker one. It is easier for a Winston to deal with a Genji than it is for the opposite. The same can be said for Pharah and Junkrat, Hitscanner and Pharah, and flankers against Ana. The latter always has to be more skilled to deal with than the former. Just because you use a hero when it's improper doesn't mean you should be rewarded. Being able to use your hero in a poor situation is the reward for mastery. I had to put this in to make everyone shut the hell up about skill and being like, Genji sucks in these situations. Well, yeah, he's weaker in those situations, so you have to be better than your opponent. You just have to put in the time, and your reward is being better than your opponent in a weak situation. That's it. You cover your weaknesses up. That's what skill's really about. Most people don't understand this. And I think they would disagree with it. They'd be angry. But fuck. Again, this still doesn't make anyone feel better. Logical talks about an emotional response hardly end well. If you ever have a girlfriend, she's not here right now. If you ever have a girlfriend, alright, just fucking remember this one, guys. Alright? But it does bring up an issue with a flat design. If players still feel upset about these matchups, then maybe the natural advantage one hero has over another is too much. So this is essentially when Brig, Doomfist, or Moira go into their strongest situation. Right? It feels like rock, paper, scissors, and no amount of skill could help that, and thus the player feels frustrated and hopeless. This is the exact opposite of what an FPS should feel like, the skill part. As in an FPS, you should kind of feel hopeless and frustrated a lot of the time because you should be playing against better players constantly and just getting your ass kicked as you get better. But you shouldn't feel like there's nothing you could have done with your skill that could solve the situation. There should be something eventually that you can do. And these are some of the challenges in a role-based flat design in an FPS. Because it's an FPS, it really inherently says skill should matter a lot. And then you have role-based stuff, which heroes are good against other heroes without the need of skill. You'll see a lot of complaints about people saying that are overpowered or not fun. We'll tread this line. At first, the community was fine with niche heroes, or niche heroes, and specialists, but they were quickly outed as weak heroes. Sure, if I wanted to fill a specific role, I could just reach out and grab that answer, but the counter was just as easy of an answer, right? So we look at our little grabby thing. If I go, oh, I'm playing Junkrat because it's a closed-in game, well, they can easily pick like this another thing where it's like, oh, this hero just dunks on Junkrat. Alright. This is why the enemy team reaches out and grabs a simple answer to deal with your specialist. Overwatch objectives can be won in a single fight, and a specialist is so specified, it should be specific, in what they can do, that you can easily counterpick it, resulting in your immediate loss. Specialists were quickly faded out of in the competitive scene because of the risks they had. This is why we saw... Oh, this starts to make sense realistically instead of just on paper, and it's what was missed in Overwatch's design from the start. I think they did not... Either they understood this and they omitted it and they ignored it, or they didn't understand this part. If a specialist is too good in their role, it feels like they're overpowered and they didn't work for it. If they're not extremely good in their role, then they have no use in the game at all. So, it's funny, people talk about a pick-ban system, and these same people usually say, oh no, specialists are good, they're allowed to be good on certain maps, but they shouldn't be good all the time. Like, Sim should be good on these couple maps, but if you support hero bans, you just ban that hero out every time. Map-specific heroes would never be ran. This is why we saw reworks to Torb and Sim. Right, they're too strong at specializing, we needed more generalists. While we got large changes to Bastion, Junkrat, and Reaper. For people that don't think Reaper got a lot of changes, he got a significant amount of changes, most notably his passive when it originally came out. Heroes on death dropped health, and he would pick it up. Well, that was too slow for how fast Overwatch went, so we got it to lifesteal on his weapons. Blizzard had to change their balance philosophy because of how easily some heroes were dealt with. Not because they were weak, but because of the role they filled. It starts the idea that all heroes need to become more generalists to survive being counterpicked, or more heroes need weaknesses that all heroes can exploit. It drastically changes the concept of balance to X hero is overpowered or X hero is weak to how many options are viable against a hero. Identical in my definition of skill, more options mean a hero is easier to deal with, and the fewer options, the more difficult a hero is to fight. So instead of saying a hero is too strong or overpowered, you need to say, look, I have to run this one thing because of that hero being ran. Is that good or bad? Well, if we, as a community, prefer variety, then yes, it is bad. If you're fine with a single meta for the rest of the time, no, it's perfectly fine. It's not a big deal. But if you're like, I want to see more heroes being played and more strategies being done, then heroes need to have, essentially, they shouldn't have the same amount of ways to deal with them, but it should be close, right? It shouldn't be like, oh, Genji, or not, Junkrat, you can run pretty much any combination against. Not any, but any main strategy at the Overwatch League level can be ran against a Junkrat. Double shield can, double sniper can, hit scan, dive, anything can be run against a Junkrat. But if I say Widow, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, you have to do one specific thing. But then she's easy to be dealt with. And I'd say, no. Because she has fewer options against her, she's actually very strong. It doesn't matter if she's balanced. She inherently has a hero pick advantage, and that makes her oppressive. Which brings us to the most recent Genji changes as of June 2nd, 2020. I've noticed I have to date my stuff because when I look back at old posts, I'm like, oh shit, no one's going to remember this. Genji is getting quite a few buffs. Deflect is now cancelable, and duration is increased to 2 seconds. His spread with his right click is lower, and he gets a small damage increase, about 8%. I will note, as a salty Junkrat player, when Junkrat got an 8% damage increase, his ult charge got nerfed by 10%, and Genji gets an 8% damage increase, and they didn't do shit to his ult. Notice the thing with these changes, this won't help against Moira at all. And really, if you look at these changes, they don't. Everyone's like, these changes are great for Genji. And then they're like, but they don't address the Moira issue that everyone was complaining about. That's on purpose. If you're noticing, Moira is meant to be good against flankers. Nothing changed with these changes. They won't help against Moira at all. In fact, he'll still lose against her on average. These are changes that change the focus of Genji from an anti-support flanker to more of an anti-tank or DPS type of flanker. They're trying to tell players to use Genji to deal with other issues other than diving the backlines. This could have been solved by picking a different hero, but Overwatch is about diversity, and everyone wants more heroes to be viable. So this is Genji's slight, I don't want to call it a rework, but he's doing a slight pivot. It was like, kill the weak heroes, find an opportunity, burst them down, get out. And now it's like, your tools now can deal with tanks and other DPS, so maybe stop diving on the Moira that's designed to beat you, and maybe do something else in the game. Which is, it is an answer to the problem with Genji. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong answer, I'm saying it is an answer. And that's where we're at today with Overwatch. If we want heroes to be viable, first we need to examine if their role is still needed. If not, then rework. Reworks often pivot skills to fill a new role. If their role is still needed, and we need to see how many options are available against that hero. If too few options, then we need to identify a general weakness and look to expand it. This could be saying Widow didn't have a weakness or as big of a weakness when she had an 8-second cooldown on her grapple. So they increased it to 10 to expand her weakness to allow more heroes to take advantage of it. If too many options, then identify the most common role that exploits it and bolster it. We see this with Junkrat and his faster concussive mine, right? It made him better at mid-range. It helps him deal with flying heroes and hit-scan heroes at mid-range. They saw a weakness. They're like, he's too weak in this area. Let's make this change. It'll help him in his weakest area. Let's see what he does from there. Lastly, we start to look up on how we actually change the hero's kit. Make sure it lines up with the goals we defined above. If we look at multiple heroes and see the same type of weakness, maybe it's ideal to weaken an entire role of the hero. Entire role of heroes. So essentially, if we look at like 6 DPS heroes and we're like, D.Va's an issue, or off-tanks are an issue, maybe we need to address off-tanks as a whole, or vice versa. If we look at tanks and we're like, burst damage support, or burst damage long-range heroes are too big, maybe we have to look at that entire role. No idea is too big or small if it's the right answer. I have to say this because it doesn't matter if people have muscle memory. If a change is needed, then Blizzard must implement the change. So, on the forums, people were bitching about how Junkrat's muscle memory with concussive mine has changed because it's a different art. It made him better. It addressed the problem. Stop complaining about it and just adapt to the change because it's better for Junkrat as a whole. I don't care if Widow gets like a 3.25 second delay from when she shoots a sniper rifle. If that is the right answer, then people have to change. Blizzard cannot be afraid of their player base. I have a blog, and I do it for just personal notes, and it's like questions I could ask Jeff. And the one question is do you believe you could balance the game properly if you're afraid of your player base? My answer is no. His answer may be yes, because that's how they balance Overwatch. Originally, I mentioned that not liking Moira is more about not wanting an anti-flanker support, but maybe that role wasn't needed originally. But maybe the role that wasn't needed originally wasn't Moira's, but instead Genji's. So we talk about, we're always like, Moira's not needed, Moira's not needed, Moira's not needed. Anti-flank, no. Maybe it's Genji that's not needed. A flanker that has an advantage over every support was a bit too strong in the early days, and as new heroes get rolled out to deal with them, his niche has become less of an option. He's still strong, it's just difficult to play him consistently. I believe the proper response is to rework Genji instead of Moira. After all, a hero that's designed to get in the backlines and easily kill the support heroes doesn't sound fun for anyone. Especially if the support heroes keep trending to being more self-sufficient. Supports, overall, as Overwatch comes out more and more with supports, they're becoming more and more self-sufficient as opposed to the original supports that came out in the cast. As supports become more efficient or self-sufficient, heroes that target them alone, flankers, will become less and less viable. This is good, but until like that role essentially is not existence anymore. And that may be where Genji's at right now. So this paragraph just kind of flips it on its head, and we're all saying Moira shouldn't exist, Moira shouldn't exist, Moira shouldn't exist. And now we're like, should Genji exist? And when we complain about stuff, we should talk about, like, follow that workflow I kind of talked about and see where we're at. And that's kind of the post. This is all I could coherently write, but I'm sure there's more. I have more ideas that I'll keep blogging. For me, the first step to understanding an idea is to write it out. Only then can you start correcting. I know designing from this point of view seems bland, but most of my ideas are a way to organize, understand, and develop a system. A lot of old games I grew up with in the 90s started from a cool idea and making it a reality. It's important to not lose sight of that. Most of our favorite heroes didn't start with balance and skill. It was more of a fun idea that they ran with, then balanced over time. Blizzard and the community just need to stop sometimes and take a look back and understand how it works and how we got here. It's the only way we're going to move forward in a proper way. So while I do like this really bland and just corporate step by step, this is how we make a hero, understand like that's not how you should design a hero, but when you design a hero, we step back and we kind of apply this method to it, and we just learn a bit from it. Because if you designed a hero like that, it would be so boring. Oh, it would be so boring. Yeah. So, I'm sorry I didn't pay attention to the chat. I appreciate everyone that subbed. 5 rubes, 17 months. Jake the Snake, 22 months, says yo. And Turbo Time. Sub to Immortal Nerd. Immortal Nerd, congratulations. That's the post.